On March 27, 2011, Brian Harper, a 32-year-old wildlife photographer, set out alone from Phoenix, Arizona, toward the Sonoran Desert. This vast expanse, silent, arid, and largely untouched, was among the most unforgiving landscapes in the American Southwest. Brian intended to spend several days capturing images of the night sky and forgotten mine structures near the remote settlement of Ajo, continuing his long-term visual exploration of abandoned towns scattered across the West. 2 days later, on March 29, Brian's voice went silent. He failed to reach his family, breaking a pattern he had never missed before. Nearly 9 years passed before the truth surfaced. His remains were eventually uncovered inside an enormous ant mound, located less than 3 meters from where his vehicle had once been parked. Investigators later confirmed that Brian had not wandered off in confusion, nor had he succumbed to thirst. He had been restrained, killed, and placed into a shallow depression in the earth, an unmarked grave that desert ants gradually claimed as their own. Brian Harper entered the world on August 23, 1978, in Phoenix. He was the younger son in the Harper household, with one older brother, Daniel. After earning a degree in photojournalism from the University of Arizona in 2002, Brian built a freelance career documenting wildlife and desert environments. His photographs appeared in Arizona Highways, Desert USA, and multiple travel-focused publications. Those who worked with him spoke of a disciplined and gifted professional, someone comfortable with solitude and accustomed to working far from civilization. Following his divorce in 2009, Brian retreated even deeper into the desert. Extended solo hikes became routine. He often traveled light, carrying only essential gear and limited water, trusting his experience more than caution. On March 25, 2011, Brian called Daniel to explain his plans for the coming weekend. He described his destination, abandoned mines near Ajo in Puma County. The area, he said, offered pristine darkness for astrophotography and dramatic structures to photograph at first light. Brian promised to return by the evening of March 28. That call marked the final contact he would ever make with his family. When March 29 passed without a word, concern turned into alarm. Brian did not answer repeated calls. That night, Daniel contacted the Puma County Sheriff's Office to report his brother missing. The following morning, deputies located Brian's blue Toyota 4Runner parked beside the abandoned Ventana mine, roughly 30 miles north of Ajo. The vehicle was locked. Inside sat his backpack, camping supplies, food, water bottles, and a cell phone with a dead battery. Missing were the car keys, and the Canon camera Brian never traveled without. A coordinated search began immediately. Volunteers, tracking dogs, and a helicopter equipped with thermal imaging swept the terrain. Brian's footprints were traced about a mile from the car, heading southeast toward low hills. They continued for another half-mile before vanishing across bare rock, where the ground no longer held impressions. For 7 days, teams scoured more than 100 square miles of desert. Abandoned mines, ravines, and narrow crevices were inspected. No heat signatures appeared from the air. No trace of Brian, no body, no camera, no keys, was found beyond the point where his tracks dissolved into stone. On April 7, 2011, the active search was halted. The case was downgraded to a missing person investigation. Officials proposed familiar explanations: a fall into an unknown shaft, fatal dehydration after disorientation, or a deadly encounter with wildlife. None were supported by evidence. Brian's family refused to let the desert have the final word. For 3 months, they searched independently, but the land yielded nothing. In August 2011, a memorial was held without remains. Though technically open, the case lay dormant for nearly a decade. Then, on June 20, 2020, far from any road or trail, answers surfaced. A research team from the University of Arizona, led by entomologist Dr. Marta Estrada and 2 graduate students, was surveying desert harvester ant populations east of Ajo. Their work focused on how climate change was altering insect migration patterns. The region they studied sat near the Mexican border, a harsh and seldom visited stretch of desert. Approximately 3 miles southeast of the Ventana mine, the team encountered something unexpected: an ant mound of extraordinary scale. Typical harvester ant nests measure only a few feet across. This one stretched nearly 10 feet wide, rising over a foot high, with multiple entrances, at least 7 visible at the surface. Dr. Estrada, with 2 decades of experience studying social insects, immediately recognized the anomaly. Such dimensions suggested either a supercolony or a nest that had remained undisturbed for many years. The team chose to excavate a section of the mound, intending to map its tunnels and estimate the colony's size, unaware that beneath the carefully engineered chambers lay the final chapter of a life the desert had hidden in plain sight. With shovels and soft brushes, the researchers began exposing one of the side passages on the mound's northern edge. The work was slow and deliberate. Then, at roughly 3 feet beneath the surface, metal struck resistance. As the surrounding sand was cleared away, a pale object emerged, smooth, elongated, widening slightly at one end. Dr. Estrada recognized it instantly. It was a human femur. The excavation stopped at once. The team withdrew from the site and used a satellite phone to alert the Puma County Sheriff's office. By nightfall, detectives and forensic specialists had arrived. The area was sealed. The ant mound and everything within 50 feet of it were designated an active crime scene. Over the next 2 days, forensic teams carried out a meticulous dig beneath the mound. Below the nest, embedded in compacted clay 2 to 3 feet underground, they uncovered a crude pit, uneven in shape, roughly 6 feet long, 3 feet wide, and 2 feet deep. Inside lay an almost complete human skeleton, folded inward as if forced into itself. The spine curved unnaturally. The legs were drawn toward the chest. The arms were positioned behind the back. The skull leaned forward, partially caught among the roots of a creosote bush growing directly above the grave. Dr. Kevin Jiang, a forensic anthropologist from the Pima County Medical Examiner's Office, examined the remains at the discovery site. Nearly all soft tissue was gone. 9 years of desert heat, bacterial action, and insect activity had stripped the body to bone. Harvester ants, known scavengers of organic matter, had fed on the remains over time. The colony that rose above the pit had sustained itself on this hidden source, explaining the abnormal size and longevity of the nest. Fragments of clothing were recovered alongside the skeleton, what remained of a cotton t-shirt, denim jeans, and underwear, all heavily degraded. One torn section of the shirt still showed part of a logo, Copper Valley Farm Co-op, a local agricultural cooperative known for distributing promotional shirts at events around Ajo. Other objects surfaced as well. A severely corroded metal water canteen. Several coins dated between 2008 and 2009. The decayed remnants of a leather belt. And lengths of nylon rope, roughly a 1/4 inch thick. Bone samples were submitted for DNA testing. On June 29, the results confirmed the identity. Genetic material extracted from the femur matched that of Daniel Harper with a first-degree kinship probability of 99.9%. The remains were those of Brian Harper. A detailed post-recovery examination was conducted by Dr. Jiang at the county morgue. His report, finalized on July 3, 2020, documented critical findings. Both forearms showed horizontal grooves along the radius and ulna near the wrists. The marks were circular, measuring 1 to 2 mm deep and approximately 5 mm wide. These injuries were consistent with sustained pressure from a rigid binding. Rope or wire, tightened over time. The damage extended into the periosteum, indicating prolonged restraint and repeated struggle. Similar markings appeared on the lower leg bones, where the ankles would have been bound together. The pattern told a clear story. The victim had been restrained at both wrists and ankles and had fought against those bindings for an extended period. The skull revealed further trauma. On the left parietal bone, about 2 inches above and behind the ear, investigators identified a linear fracture nearly 3 inches long. Fine cracks radiated outward from the impact point. On the interior surface, bone fragments were driven inward, a sign of significant blunt force. Dr. Jiang concluded that the blow occurred shortly before death or at the moment of death itself. It was powerful enough to cause loss of consciousness, though not necessarily immediate fatality. Based on the body's position, the ligature marks, and the cranial injury, investigators reconstructed the final sequence. Brian had been bound at the wrists and ankles, struck on the head, and placed into the pit while still alive or in the final stages of dying. An exact cause of death could not be established due to the absence of soft tissue. However, the most probable explanation was a convergence of factors: traumatic brain injury, dehydration, and extreme heat. In late March, daytime temperatures in the Ajo region routinely reached 90 to 100 degrees Fahrenheit. A restrained person, left without water in a shallow pit under the desert sun, could succumb to heat stroke and dehydration within 24 to 36 hours. The desert did not take Brian by accident. It bore witness. The case was assigned to Detective Robert Sanchez of the Puma County Sheriff's Office Homicide Division. At 48, Sanchez brought more than 2 decades of investigative experience to a file that had long been dormant. He began where others had stopped, by revisiting the records from the original 2011 disappearance. As he worked through old transcripts and reports, one overlooked detail surfaced. Witness statements from April 2011 referenced a confrontation involving Brian Harper shortly before he vanished. Daniel Harper had told investigators at the time that his brother mentioned an argument with a local man roughly a week before the trip ended. According to Brian, the man insisted that land near one of the abandoned mines was privately owned and accused him of trespassing and illegally taking photographs. Brian had dismissed the encounter, describing the individual as an unstable older man living in a trailer somewhere in the desert. No name. No precise location. In 2011, the lead was documented, then set aside. Investigators had been focused on the possibility of an accident. Sanchez chose a different path. He requested land ownership records surrounding the Ventana mine. Most of the surrounding territory fell under Bureau of Land Management jurisdiction, federal land open to the public. But scattered within a 5-mile radius were small, privately held parcels. Remnants of old mining claims. Forgotten plots purchased decades earlier. One parcel stood out. Located approximately a mile and a half southwest of where Brian's body had been found, the land belonged to Douglas Ray, 67 years old. Records showed Ray had purchased 20 acres in 1985, including an abandoned mine, paying very little for ground few others wanted. Though no profitable mining had occurred there for decades, Ray occasionally leased access to amateur prospectors searching for traces of copper. Sanchez ran a background check. Ray's history included multiple arrests in the 1990s and early 2000s for minor offenses, disturbing the peace, making threats. There was also an assault arrest in 2003 that never went to trial. Interviews with neighbors painted a consistent picture. Ray lived alone. He avoided town. He distrusted outsiders. Many described him as paranoid, volatile, and deeply territorial. On July 8, Sanchez contacted Ray by phone. He introduced himself, explained he was reviewing a 9-year-old missing person case, and asked if Ray would be willing to answer a few questions. Ray agreed to meet on his property. The following day, Sanchez and another detective drove nearly 20 miles northeast of Ajo along an isolated dirt road used only by the occasional prospector. The property came into view, a raised trailer and an aging 30-foot airstream parked near the entrance of a long-abandoned mine. Tools, scrap metal, and debris were scattered across the ground. A weathered sign marked the boundary, private property. No trespassing. Ray stepped out to meet them. He appeared older than his stated age, thin, deeply tanned, gray hair hanging long, dressed in a stained t-shirt and worn jeans. Sanchez explained why they were there. Brian Harper had disappeared in March 2011. His remains had recently been found. The department was identifying anyone who might have crossed paths with him during that time. Ray said the name meant nothing to him. People passed through the desert all the time, he claimed. He didn't keep track of strangers. Sanchez showed him a photograph of Brian. Ray studied it briefly. Then he hesitated. He said the face looked familiar, maybe he had seen the man, maybe not. He wasn't sure. When asked about an argument with a photographer trespassing on his land in March 2011, Ray deflected. He said he had confronted many trespassers over the years and couldn't recall specific people or dates. Sanchez requested permission to search the trailer. Ray refused, stating that detectives would need a warrant. They left. The following day, Sanchez secured a search warrant, citing Daniel Harper's account of the confrontation and the proximity of Ray's property to the burial site. On July 10, detectives and forensic specialists returned to Douglas Ray's land and began a systematic search of the trailer and surrounding area. What had once been dismissed as coincidence was now impossible to ignore. Inside the trailer, investigators encountered conditions bordering on unlivable. Rotting food, scattered trash, insects crawling through every corner. Yet beneath the filth, evidence waited. On a shelf above a small table sat a box containing photographs and papers. Many of the images showed vehicles parked along remote dirt roads throughout the area, each labeled with handwritten dates spanning multiple years, including 2011. One photograph, marked March 2011, captured a blue Toyota SUV parked near an abandoned mine. The license plate was clearly visible. It belonged to Brian Harper. Also inside the box was a worn notebook. In it, Ray had kept personal records of what he described as trespassers and suspicious individuals. The entries were inconsistent, some dated, others not. The handwriting varied, uneven and erratic. One entry dated March 27, 2011 read, "Another spy with a camera near the old Ventana. Says he's a photographer, but I know they're surveying land for the government. Needs to be taught a lesson." The next entry, dated March 28, stated, "Caught the spy on my land near the south entrance. Tied his hands and feet so he learns to respect private property. Left him to think about what he's done. We'll check tomorrow to see if the lesson worked." March 29 followed, "Spy still not moving. Probably pretending. I'll leave him another day so he understands this is serious." March 30, "Still not moving. Maybe the heat killed him. That's not my fault. The desert punishes intruders. Need to move the body." After that, the notebook fell silent on the matter. The next dated entry, April 5, addressed an unrelated topic. Outside the trailer, forensic teams recovered additional items. A coil of nylon rope, roughly a quarter-inch thick, matching the rope fragments found with the remains. A shovel bearing traces of hardened clay. And a hand-marked map detailing mine locations and property lines. 1.3 miles southeast of Ray's land, was circled unlabeled, Old Waste Pit. Douglas Ray was arrested on July 11, 2020, charged with first-degree murder and unlawful imprisonment. He offered no resistance. Ray insisted investigators had misunderstood his intentions and maintained that he had never meant to kill anyone. During a formal interview conducted with his attorney present, Ray provided a statement that largely aligned with the account recorded in his notebook. He admitted that on the evening of March 27, 2011, he encountered Brian Harper near the old Ventana mine while Brian was taking photographs. Ray acknowledged that the location was not legally his property but claimed it fell within what he considered his territory. He also stated that he believed photographers in the desert were covert agents, working for the government or mining corporations to assess land for future seizure or development. According to Ray, he returned to the mine early the next morning, March 28, around 6 a.m., and found Brian asleep near his SUV. Ray woke him and began questioning him aggressively, accusing him of spying. Brian attempted to explain, showing him his camera, but Ray dismissed the explanation. When Brian tried to get into his vehicle and leave, Ray blocked him. A struggle followed. Ray struck Brian on the head with a heavy flashlight, rendering him unconscious. Fearing he might have killed him, Ray checked for a pulse and found Brian still alive. Ray claimed that what followed was meant as intimidation, not murder. He bound Brian's wrists and ankles with rope, placed him in the back of his pickup truck, and drove him to a shallow pit, an old mining waste site dug decades earlier, roughly 3 miles from the Ventana mine. Ray left Brian there, restrained, saying he intended for him to reflect on trespassing. Ray stated he planned to return later that day to release Brian and let him go with a warning. When he came back that evening, Brian remained unconscious and did not respond. Frightened, Ray chose to wait, convincing himself the man was only asleep. He returned again the following morning. Brian had not moved. Panic set in. Ray realized something was terribly wrong but feared calling for help would expose the kidnapping. Instead, he waited another day, clinging to the hope that Brian would wake up on his own, while the desert continued its silent work. By the evening of March 30, Ray returned once more to the pit. This time, the truth could no longer be avoided. Brian was not breathing. His body was cold. Life had already withdrawn. Ray later claimed he never expected this outcome. He said he believed a young, healthy man could endure a day, perhaps two, restrained in the desert. He insisted he underestimated both the severity of the head injury and the speed with which dehydration overtakes the human body under desert heat. Faced with the reality of death and the weight of responsibility, Ray chose concealment over confession. That same night, he buried the body beneath layers of dirt, flattening the soil and attempting to erase any sign of disturbance. Brian's car keys and camera were thrown into an abandoned mine on Ray's property. His hope was simple and cruel, that the desert would keep its silence, and the disappearance would be written off as another unsolved vanishing. Ray's statement was formally recorded, corroborated through physical evidence, and submitted to the prosecutor's office. He was charged with second-degree murder, an unlawful killing without premeditation, but carried out with extreme disregard for human life, as well as unlawful imprisonment resulting in death. The trial began in late February 2021 and concluded in March at the Puma County Superior Court. The defense argued that Ray never intended to kill Brian Harper. They described the act as a reckless attempt to frighten away a perceived trespasser, an action born of fear rather than malice. The prosecution countered with evidence that told a different story. Ray had struck Brian with enough force to fracture his skull, restrained him, abandoned him in desert temperatures exceeding 90 degrees, deprived him of water, and failed to seek help even when it became clear the situation was dire. Expert witnesses testified that a person suffering from traumatic brain injury, bound and exposed to direct sunlight in the Arizona desert, has virtually no chance of survival without immediate medical intervention. Intent, they argued, was irrelevant. Ray's actions sealed the outcome. After 4 hours of deliberation, the jury reached its decision. On March 23, 2021, exactly 10 years after Brian Harper vanished, Douglas Ray was found guilty of second-degree murder and unlawful imprisonment resulting in death. During sentencing, Judge Maria Gonzalez acknowledged that the killing may not have been planned in advance. Still, she emphasized that Ray's conduct demonstrated a profound disregard for human life and an absence of remorse during the 9 years Brian's body remained buried beneath the desert floor. Ray was sentenced to 27 years in prison, with no possibility of parole for the first 15. Before sentencing was finalized, Ray addressed the court. He said he regretted Brian's death. He claimed he never wanted it to happen and insisted his actions were driven by a desire to protect what he believed was his land. Then he added a statement that quickly spread across headlines and ignited public outrage: "He shouldn't have died. It's a desert. I thought they would find him." Brian Harper's family attended the trial. After the verdict, his brother Daniel spoke to the press. He said the sentence could never restore what was lost, but it did bring a measure of justice, and an end to a decade of unanswered questions. Brian's remains were cremated. In accordance with his wishes, written after his divorce, his ashes were scattered in the Grand Canyon, a place of vast silence and open sky, fitting for a man who spent his life searching the wilderness for light. The desert had hidden the truth for 10 years. In the end, it gave it back. If you found this story meaningful, please like, subscribe, and share where you're listening from. We'll see you in the next episode.